Kirby's Epic Yarn is a side-scrolling platformer developed by Goodfeel and HAL Laboratory and released for the Wii back in 2010. While Kirby had been mostly absent from home consoles since Kirby 64, Nintendo decided to take Goodfeel's Fluff of Yarn project starring Prince Fluff and rework the title into a full-blown Kirby game, marking the hero's return to platforming on a non-handheld system. It isn't clear why Nintendo was reluctant to produce a console platforming title featuring Kirby, especially considering Kirby's Epic Yarn would go on to become a million seller. The demand was clearly there, but not only was the title a commercial success, the game was a media darling, first dazzling the press at E3 2010 before receiving positive review scores upon release. Game Informer scored the game a 9.5 out of 10, stating, "Honestly, the only crowd that I can imagine not enjoying Kirby is jaded gamers who are too cool for something so whimsical. Whatever the case, they're missing out on a colorful, unique game that reminds me of why I fell in love with gaming back on my NES. Imagination, challenge, and fun." IGN agreed, giving the game a 9 out of 10, noting, "Kirby's Epic Yarn is a fantastic game that might skew a little younger than experienced gamers might be comfortable with, but the subtle level challenges and the incredibly creative art direction is well worth the experience." Finally, GameSpy also scored the game a 9 out of 10, proclaiming, "Kirby's Epic Yarn is, at its quilted heart, an enjoyable 2D platformer that anyone who understands the language of fun can pick up and play. And it has an aesthetic that you can marvel at stress-free from beginning to end." So, after 7 years, is Kirby's Epic Yarn still this good, or is the game starting to show its age? Let's take a look. Kirby's Epic Yarn contains a simple plot. One day, while strolling around Dreamland, Kirby attempts to devour a metamato belonging to a sorcerer named Yin Yarn, who promptly banishes him to a world called Patchland through a sock portal around his neck. And that's it. So, with the plot out of the way, let's get to the gameplay basics. Unlike previous entries to the series, Kirby cannot inhale air to float, nor can he devour enemies. Instead, Kirby is packing a new set of moves to match his yarn form. Double pressing a direction will turn Kirby into a car, allowing faster movement, while in the air, pressing the jump button a second time turns Kirby into a parachute, slowing his descent. Finally, pressing down while in the air will drop him like a weight, crushing enemies and breaking certain blocks. The moveset is flexible, offering all of the staples one would expect from a platformer without being confusing or complicated. Attacking is also handled differently in this adventure. Instead of devouring enemies, Kirby can lasso them with his yarn. A short press will simply unravel a foe, while a long press will turn them into a ball. This ball can then be thrown like a projectile, dispatching other enemies or breaking blocks. This lasso maneuver isn't limited to roping enemies, however, and can also be used to interact with the environment. This could be unzipping zippers or grabbing buttons. Even better, some buttons will actually fold over part of the level, revealing new areas for Kirby. While the lack of ability copying is a bold departure for the series, Kirby can still transform. Certain scripted moments exist, forcing the player to grab a power-up, transforming the character into all sorts of creatures and machines. The tank bot, for example, puts Kirby inside a giant tank, using motion controls to aim up and down with traditional controls for shooting, moving, and jumping. The fire engine offers a similar mechanic, using the motion controls to aim the fire hose. Rounding out the motion-controlled power-ups is this train, where the player points at the screen to draw tracks. One can also shake the controller to break free from ice, though mashing buttons will accomplish this task as well. There are 6 additional transformations which do not require the use of motion controls. The saucer power-up is a clear nod to the series' roots, but with a twist. Rather than firing a laser, the saucer can beam up enemies, like the classic cosmic arc. Once 3 enemies have been captured, Kirby can use an attack to clear the screen. The spin board alters the gameplay significantly. The forward momentum is automatic, and the player is limited to jumping and spinning. Spinning can be used to bounce off enemies and avoid taking damage. The goal of these levels then becomes finding an optimal route through the level while avoiding hazards. The off-roader offers similar gameplay, though the player has control over the acceleration. There are multiple opponents on the screen needing to be avoided, and boosting power-ups allowing the off-roader to smash through certain blocks. Moving on is the digger, which can dig through cotton-filled areas, eschewing platforming altogether. The dolphin power-up allows more elegant swimming than in standard form, in addition to adding a more efficient underwater attack. Lastly, there are two flying machines. These are utilized for vertical and horizontal shooting levels. The horizontal form does differ slightly, however. Holding the shoot button auto-fires shots forward, while rapidly pressing the button offers a spread shot. Curiously, this feature is missing from the horizontal levels, which offers just a single bullet pattern. While the lack of copy abilities is a definite departure for this spin-off, Kirby's Epic Yarn still offers plenty of different forms for the player to learn. With the controls out of the way and the tutorial level completed, more of the plot is revealed. It turns out Yin Yarn ripped Patchland into 7 pieces, with Kirby currently residing on a slice. After rescuing a local named Prince Fluff, a piece of magic yarn is discovered which stitches together the second piece of the world, revealing the next land for Kirby to explore. The rest of Kirby's Epic Yarn plays out like previous Kirby titles. There is a hub world containing levels, unlocked one at a time. After beating 4 levels, a boss room is available. Defeat the boss to obtain more magic yarn, which stitches in the next slice of the world to continue the adventure. Grassland is the typical first world, with bright set pieces and a pleasant aesthetic. For example, not every block is created equal. Blocks with a yarn outline can be lassoed, while solid blocks cannot. One must throw a ball of yarn at it or use the weight attack to break them. Additionally, blocks with down arrows on them will always fall towards the ground. This creates interesting moments where the player will need to be aware of these interactions so they can remove a yarn block, causing a downward block to fall, then float across the water, creating a platform to reach a new area. Big Bean Vine is another interesting stage, forcing the player to move vertically up through the level to reach the exit. This would be trivial in a standard Kirby game, but the lack of flying allowed the developers to offer different challenges for the normally floaty protagonist. This is also a good time to talk about the different layers of the world. While not in every level, it's a theme carried throughout the adventure. Doors will allow Kirby to move back a layer. Once behind the main layer, stitching in the fabric will act as both platforms as well as barriers, preventing progress. Another interesting mechanic is how different enemies react when thrown. Generally, balled-up enemies can be thrown up, across, or diagonally. However, these bee-like enemies will actually home in on other enemies when thrown, which varies up the gameplay and creates some strategy later on. After completing the first 4 levels, the player is presented with the first boss, Fangora. Much like the 90s-inspired gameplay, the bosses in Kirby's Epic Yarn follow a classic formula. First is a dodge phase, where the player needs to avoid multiple attack patterns, then an attack phase, where the player can finally damage the boss. In Fangora's case, after dodging attacks, the player can pull on his tongue to register a hit. Complete this pattern 3 times and the boss is defeated, stitching in Hotland. Hotland is the lava section of Kirby's Epic Yarn. This includes desert set pieces complete with quicksand and levels with lava. However, the developers didn't limit themselves to stereotypical hot-themed gimmicks. Cool Cave is the opposite of what one might expect, featuring a chilly cave. And here, the player will need to avoid obstacles and discover alternate paths, thanks to the floor constantly being warped. Dino Jungle doesn't follow the hot theme either, presenting a prehistoric theme complete with a wide variety of land, water, and air-based creatures. Hotland also ups the difficulty. As expected, jumping while dashing will yield a jump with more distance, and there are areas requiring this 2-step maneuver to find secret goodies, rewarding players who have mastered the controls. After clearing the 4 stages, Kirby arrives at the second boss, Hot Wings, returning to the fiery theme. Like Fangora, the player is tasked with avoiding attack patterns, both from the environment as well as the Flaming Phoenix. Thankfully, an extra step is added to this fight. The player needs to snatch a projectile and launch it back at the bird in order to reveal its button, which can then be pulled to dish out the real damage. Complete this 3 times to stitch in Treatland. For those unimpressed with platforming tropes like jungles and lava, Treatland should be a welcome departure from the norm. First up is Toy Tracks, which feels like a child's playroom. I also like how interactive elements are introduced, with the player using the lasso to pull different toys into more strategic positions, giant robots acting as moving platforms, and even a damaged teddy bear needing to be repaired. Mushroom Run eschews the toy theme for a romp through a forest setting, with the main gimmick being bouncy mushrooms. Sweets Park offers a dessert shop aesthetic with a cake-like motif. Finally, Melody Town is a music-themed stage with drums, pianos, and horns. The variety between the 4 stages is terrific and really helps prevent the action from feeling stale. This brings us to the most unique boss in the game, Squashini. This magician character uses a slot machine to choose his attack, like a performance. If the player correctly avoids the attack, they can usually use the trick as a projectile against the boss. For example, tossing a card, correctly guessing which hat he is under, or returning a bomb. Same as before, once the boss has been wounded, the player can pull on a button to dish out damage. Complete this 3 times and Waterland will be stitched in. The first level, Splash Beach, actually uses the water in an interesting way. The tide is constantly going up and down, changing the action from platforming to swimming, with each gameplay style being required to progress through certain obstacles, which I like. Blub Blub Ocean, on the other hand, is a more traditional water stage, requiring the player to swim. I'm not the biggest fan of water stages, as designers always seem to fail at them, and sadly, Kirby's Epic Yarn is no exception. Lame gimmicks like water currents are added, which don't challenge the player in any meaningful way. The combat doesn't change either, and the action is reduced to floating about the screen at a sluggish pace. The previously mentioned dolphin power-up does speed things up, but the gameplay is still shallow. Thankfully, Secret Island forgoes water altogether, instead focusing on multi-layered gameplay. Obstacles must be cleared by going behind them, and the constant back and forth adds a new dimension to the gameplay, which is nice. Capamari is the 4th boss, a squid-like creature. In his first phase, the player must unravel his body while avoiding the disembodied tentacles. Once this is accomplished, the action returns to the previously employed patterns. First, dodge Capamari's attacks, then snatch one of the little squids and throw it at the boss, disabling him, then pull the button to inflict damage. 3 hits later, and you know the rest. From here, the story picks back up in Dreamland, where King Dedede is having some problems. Yin Yarn captures him using imposter Waddle Dees and then sucks him through the portal sock, bringing Dreamland one step closer to Yin Yarn's control. Next, Kirby arrives in Snowland, featuring wintry set pieces, including a heavy dose of Christmas. There are some things to like here though. Instead of turning into a car when dashing, Kirby turns into a sled, which can skip over water. Additionally, the cabin segments present a new gimmick, where fabric is slowly unraveled towards the player, adding a timed element to the gameplay. Another mechanic I like is the wind. I previously mentioned the parachute could be used to slow Kirby's descent. However, it can also be used in the opposite way, with air pushing Kirby upwards. It's a nice change of pace and forces the player to use a new gameplay element rarely required up to this point. This brings us to boss number 5, King Dedede. This is an odd fight, as he looks like a marionette puppet with 4 strings moving him about the screen. His patterns follow what one might expect from a King Dedede fight. When he smashes his hammer to the ground, 2 stars will pop out. The player needs to snatch a star and toss it at Dedede, which will knock him out. From here, the player needs to lasso one of the strings. If I'm honest, this is one of the few areas in Kirby's Epic Yarn feeling legitimately sloppy. On numerous occasions, I simply couldn't lasso one of the buttons, forcing me through another loop of attacks to get another attempt. On both of my playthroughs, I experienced this, and having a 10-minute battle trying to land 4 attacks was less than satisfying. Upon defeat, the player is shown another cutscene where Yin Yarn sucks Meta Knight through a sock portal, and then the player arrives at Spaceland. While Snowland was old hat, Spaceland is refreshing. Future City contains a roller coaster ride, for example, and even better, Kirby's momentum matches the coaster when jumping. There are also areas utilizing physics, with Waddle Dees affecting the weight of these scale-like platforms. Tube Town is also rad, with timing-based obstacles needing precision lassos and precise jumping to succeed. Mysterious UFO adds reduced gravity segments. During low gravity, the weight attack can't damage enemies or crash through boxes, and the player is then tasked with alternating between normal gravity and reduced gravity to successfully navigate the level. Finally, Stellar Way amps up the difficulty with small platforms over bottomless pits, in addition to a ton of rotating platforms. Generally speaking, all of the Spaceland levels do an awesome job throwing new challenges at the player and forcing them to react to new mechanics using their honed skills. This brings us to the next boss, Meta Knight. This boss fight doesn't present much new. The goal is to dodge Meta Knight's swinging sword while lassoing the projectiles to disable the nemesis. Once disabled, pull on his button to inflict damage. Like before, do this 3 times to defeat the boss. With all 7 slices of Patchland stitched together, Prince Fluff reveals he too has a magic portal sock, and with Patchland restored, Kirby can use the second sock to return to Dreamland and finally take on Yin Yarn. The Dreamland stages are a total nostalgia trip, featuring remixed music and familiar set pieces, and even familiar mini-bosses. Still, despite returning to Dreamland, Kirby remains in Yarn form. Being the final world, the difficulty is appropriately ramped up. Wispy's Forest includes an abundance of spikes. Tempest Towers relies heavily on traveling with the wind for progression. Cloud Palace is a platforming gauntlet over bottomless pits. Finally, Castle DDD forces the player to maneuver across cannon fire, which explodes when impacting the environment, among other gimmicks. The difficulty progression is excellent and the perfect way to end the journey. This, of course, brings us to the final showdown with Yin Yarn. Yin Yarn is a proper final boss. First, he puts Kirby through a second fight against both Fangora as well as Kapamari. Then there is a fight against Yin Yarn, with the same dodging phase and attacking phase used through a majority of the game. After defeating him, the magic knitting needles creates a new nemesis, Mega Yin Yarn. For this fight, Kirby transforms into Tankbot and must simultaneously take down incoming missiles while landing hits. Succeed here and the final cutscene plays. First, Prince Fluff and Kirby dispatch the magic needles from Dreamland, then Kirby returns to his regular form. With peace restored to Dreamland, the adventure is over and the credits roll. Graphically, Kirby's Epic Yarn is a looker. As the title of the game suggests, Kirby is made out of yarn, and the worlds are made up of various fabrics and other materials. It gives the game a realistic yet cartoon-like appearance, unlike anything I've ever played. I say realistic because the fabric textures aren't just tiles repeated in an obvious way. Instead, textures are large and filled with imperfections, further enhancing the visual style. Looking past the gimmick, however, and Kirby's Epic Yarn still holds up. The use of yarn is impressive and gives the animation a vector-like quality. Kirby's transition from walking to a car, for example, looks smooth as silk, and while the game generally has a flat appearance, shadows are used to convey depth and wind ripples the fabric, elevating this past what a sprite-based affair would be able to provide. The attention to detail is outstanding. Take Fangora, for example. The way the string contracts and expands around the various body features is amazing, and the way the string breaks down and takes damage with each successive hit shows the developers didn't just want to offer a unique visual style, but wanted to take the concept as far as they could and help Patchland feel like a living, breathing world. But for as cool as the visual style is, it's the audio that grabbed me. There is something wonderfully simplistic about the soundtrack. Nearly every track is limited to 3 instruments or less. The opening track, for example, uses nothing but a single piano. Others may use more, but generally speaking, the limited instruments being played at a time gives Kirby's Epic Yarn an old-school feel when composers were forced to deal with the constraints of limited sound channels. There's also very little sound processing like reverb or echo. This blends beautifully with the ultra-realistic fabric textures to help give Kirby's Epic Yarn its own feel. This self-imposed limitation also means the composers were forced to create catchy melodies to keep the listener engaged, and boy did they deliver. There are some truly memorable tracks here, and I found myself humming to them days after playing. There is a massive amount of music here as well, so nothing ever becomes repetitive or annoying. But of course, while unique graphical and musical styles may help a game stand out, it doesn't answer the question asked at the beginning of the video. Is Kirby's Epic Yarn still good, or is it beginning to show its age? From a gameplay perspective, Kirby's Epic Yarn has a reputation for being easy. There are a few reasons for this. First, many enemies can't even harm the player. One can walk into Waddle Dees all day long and never take damage. Second, Kirby cannot die at all, ever. Touch damage will result in Kirby losing some of his collected beads, and falling into pits will simply reset the player back to the problematic platform. In fact, beating Kirby's Epic Yarn is a trivial experience that shouldn't give any gamer trouble. While difficulty is subjective for sure, the lack of challenge can harm a game, failing to provide player engagement and failing to give the player a sense of accomplishment for completing tasks, two necessary elements of any game. While the main campaign is mostly easy, it only represents about half the game. Going for a complete run is where the designers started to flex their design muscles. Each level has 4 sub-goals to complete. The first 3 goals are collecting based. Hidden in each level are 2 items and a music track. These are usually hidden in treasure chests found off the beaten path, forcing the player to check every nook and cranny, fully exploring each level. While collectathon gameplay isn't my cup of tea, 3 seems to be a reasonable number. One generally won't accidentally complete the goal without effort, yet spending the time to find the 3 items isn't a long journey. The final goal of each level is the bead goal. There is a meter at the top of the screen filling up as the player collects beads. Once certain thresholds are met, a bronze, silver, and finally gold medal will reveal themselves. Getting hit by an enemy or falling into a pit will result in a loss of beads. While dying or taking damage usually doesn't matter, it does when going for gold medals. As the difficulty ramps up in the final third of the game, getting hit can often mean the difference between success or failure. I should also mention the spin wheel at the end of each level. This wheel contains 3 different sections, each offering additional beads. The red one offers the most beads and will be enough to bump a silver medal to a gold, so hunting down these wheel pieces can be very valuable for folks going for a complete run. However, there is even more to Kirby's Epic Yarn. During the boss fights, the standard bronze, silver, and gold medal system is present. However, there is a 4th notch, a patch. Reaching this medal during a boss fight will reveal a 5th level in each of the 7 worlds, and beating the 5th level will unlock a 6th. These 14 extra stages feature a nice bump in difficulty too. Mole Hole requires an understanding of the falling blocks to complete the level. Dark Manor is dark, with light glows around Kirby, lamps, and certain enemies. Fossil Reef requires the dolphin power-up to leap between moving bubbles of water. Metamelon Isle is a gauntlet utilizing over half the different power-ups. It's a nice bump in difficulty, and completing the goals on these optional stages will challenge a player's wit, as well as their platforming skills. However, completing these 43 stages and 7 boss fights still isn't everything there is to do in the game. Near the beginning of the adventure, a landlord asks Kirby to help him furnish an apartment to secure a tenant. This is repeated a total of 5 times, and if the player hasn't collected the items, they won't be able to complete the task. This offers a reward for bothering with the collectibles in the first place. After furnishing the 5 apartments, each tenant will have a number of time challenges for the player. Zeke has 18 hide-and-seek levels, having the player locate 5 characters. Beedrix has 20 levels, requiring the player to collect a certain amount of beads. Carrie has the player carry her to a specific spot on 12 stages. Buster has 20 stages, forcing the player to defeat a set number of enemies. Finally, Mara has 30 levels, where one needs to race her to the finish line. These 100 challenges vary in quality and difficulty. First, none of these are unique levels, rather they are sections of the existing levels the player has played through in the main campaign. This is a good thing, as it forces the player to utilize skill to complete the challenges rather than learn more levels. Now, the hide-and-seek levels are mostly lame. The time limit adds an element of tension for sure, but this gameplay style doesn't really work in video game form, as noticing things on the screen through the power of observation doesn't take advantage of the interactive nature of video games. Beadrix is a lot more interesting. While collecting the appropriate amount of beads seems similar to hide and seek, these actually play out as actual platforming challenges. The player needs to platform proficiently to get through the level in the time allotted. Additionally, different triggers need to be hit to reveal lines of beads. These attributes also make the water levels bearable, with clear goals to achieve being far more engaging than plodding through slow areas. These also do a great job utilizing the transformations, forcing the player to master mechanics with a degree of difficulty not required in the normal stages due to the lack of deaths. Carry's transport levels act as puzzles. The player is tasked with figuring out how to progress Carry without being able to do basic tasks like climb ladders, enter warp tunnels, nor pull on different buttons. Additionally, certain enemies will snatch Carry, wasting precious time needed to complete the puzzles. All in all, these 12 stages are all thoughtful, adding a unique twist to the gameplay without feeling tedious. Buster's enemy defeating challenges are more of a mixed bag, but at least offer some depth. For example, those bees will home in on 3 different enemies, meaning the player needs to be sure to use the long press to capture the bee and throw before dropping into the water. The various spears and other weapons can also travel through multiple enemies, greatly reducing the amount of attacks needed to reach the goal. However, many of these levels don't differ enough from the campaign. The level sections might have more enemies than previously experienced, but are similar enough to feel like padding. Finally, Mara's 30 racing challenges also feel like padding. As best as I can tell, enemy types and locations are identical to the main campaign, and the feeling of deja vu can't be avoided. And personally, after completing 70 levels of varying quality, the last thing I wanted to do was race through 30 challenges lacking any real twist. Beating Mara is a trivial task, making these feel like real time wasters. I should mention beating each of these bonus stages rewards wallpaper used to decorate Kirby's apartment. There are also a pair of stores to buy additional things and even more wallpaper, both of which are required to complete the game. So, after clearing the campaign, unlocking all of the extra levels, collecting all of the items, all of the soundtracks, beating all 100 bonus challenges, and buying every available item, there are still 5 wallpapers remaining. After beating a level, one of the tenants will occasionally announce they've broken into Kirby's apartment to play. Upon visiting Kirby's apartment, they will each gift a wallpaper in their image. React to this 5 times and the player has finally collected every item in the game, achieving 100%. Sadly, the reward for this monumental achievement is nothing. I was hoping Prince Fluff might become a playable character, maybe even Meta Knight, offering a different way to play through the original campaign, but it just wasn't meant to be. Redecorating Kirby's apartment with Famicom wallpaper or other strange items isn't exactly my idea of fun either. I assume this was an attempt to cash in on the Farmville trend of the day, or something. Who knows, but it feels half-baked. Still, disappointing rewards aside, I can safely say Kirby's Epic Yarn is not an easy game, at least not to complete. The gold medal requirements of some of the extra campaign levels is brutal, particularly during the off-roader and shooting levels. Precise movements and quick reactions are absolutely required, and I found a few levels took me multiple attempts to learn and clear. Boom Boatyard is an auto-scrolling level and doesn't contain many beads in general, requiring a perfect run to achieve the gold. Same goes for Frigid Fjords. This stage requires perfect jumping in the buggy, along with quick reactions to falling obstacles. Tempest Towers is another one, pushing the limits of the parachute's capabilities. Thankfully, none of the tougher challenges ever feels unfair, and that is thanks to the smooth controls. Be it the secondary actions like the car, weight, and parachute, or the lasso attack, Kirby reacts near instantaneous to user inputs, and while the animations are smooth, they aren't so complex where a player is waiting for a few frames for an action to happen. Combine this with the thoughtful level gimmicks, and every obstacle presented always feels fair, free of any cheap or frustrating moments. And in this regard, Kirby's Epic Yarn rises above many side-scrolling platformers. There is a thoughtfulness permeating the entire adventure, be it the difficulty curve, which ranges from easy at the beginning to downright hard during the time challenge stages, with a smooth progression in between. And like many AAA platformers, the developers did an awesome job communicating gameplay mechanics to the player. Granted, the opening tutorial contains giant animated billboards giving visual cues on how to perform basic actions, but after this, the developers did a better job nudging the player along. Early on, there are buttons on a tree covered in beads, encouraging the player to move left and right. Later on, the player can expect similar buttons on trees even if they aren't immediately visible. In Cool Cave, the first hump in the level moves up and down automatically, letting the player know the land can be manipulated. From here on out, the player is then tasked with pulling a button to cause the change. Later, this is combined with timing to allow a chasing boulder to smash through blocks, revealing a secret treasure. One should also notice a lot of shadows differentiating the foreground layers from the background layers, and if a shadow is missing, there's a good chance it's a secret area for Kirby to walk through. Bombs work in the same fashion. At first, these can be dropped easily into position to take out block walls. Later on, these need to be tossed into areas not accessible to Kirby. The reward for clever players is treasure. Speaking of clever, one of my favorite parts of Kirby's Epic Yarn is in Sweet's Park. The player needs to use the digger power-up to get a path through this mountain of cotton, as it is normally too steep for Kirby to jump. It's a cool moment, requiring problem solving to complete, but as the digger tool has been previously showcased, the player isn't left wondering what to do next. It's these teaching moments building off each other that I really appreciate, and it makes Kirby's Epic Yarn a real treat to play through, even during the tougher stretches. So yeah, Kirby's Epic Yarn is still a terrific platformer. There is something incredibly refreshing about this one. Sure, most of the level themes and set pieces have been seen dozens of times before, from jungles and beaches to water and snow to lava and deserts, but it's the way the themes are presented helping them to feel new again. Everything has a familiar feel, as if it was inspired by the classics, but is elevated and reimagined into something completely different, and it's awesome. I do wish the bonus challenge levels were stripped back a bit. While having 100 isn't a problem, about a third of them are pointless and don't match the quality of the rest of the game. The lack of a completion bonus is also a bit disappointing, especially after grinding through some lackluster challenges. Still, these are admittedly optional and don't take away from what is an excellent main campaign. With the refreshing visual style, excellent controls, terrific level design, a massive variety of environments, and a terrific difficulty curve, I'd say Kirby is every bit as good today in 2017 as it was in 2010. It's easily one of the most delightful games I've played in a while.